next time.
Hello and welcome to DisruptEDtv, a program where we like to highlight a disruptive idea, a positive idea that can make a difference at your school. And today's guest is Dr. Tracey Severns.
Yes.
And Dr. Severns is her disruptive idea is how you can take ordinary day-to-day type data that you have in your school already at your fingertips and use it to improve your outcomes. And Dr. Severns,
Yes.
Tracey, a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
joining us today.
Thank you.
Wonderful to be here.
And we're going to start with your great news.
Yes.
So why don't you tell everybody you've got
Fantastic
great news.
news.
What is that?
The
What's your
great news that I have is, with the exception of the building that you're in, the bricks and mortar, everything that takes place within it, everything that determines what's possible for kids is completely within your power and control.
Fantastic.
So, yes, that's great news, right?
Absolutely,
Very
it's great
empowering.
news, absolutely.
Because we no longer see ourselves as victims of our circumstance, where it's a matter of the kids we happen to have or the community we happen to be in. It's about the choices and decisions that we make within the school building that determines what's possible for kids and the teachers and the leaders who occupy that school building.
That is a very important message, and
absolutely.
I know you base those decisions, or you encourage schools to base those decisions on data.
Yes,
And often that data is data that they already have an abundance of.
absolutely.
So maybe you can walk us through that process a little bit.
Well, the first thing we have to do is we really have to help people understand data is not the information that comes from standardized tests that is, occurs on an annual basis. That's far too episodic. That's far too. They're within the school building. There is data that's available every day. Data is really just information. Data is simply a way to answer the question, how are we doing and how do we know?
Oh, that's really powerful.
Yes.
So it's that I think you mentioned, you referred to it as feedback.
Yes.
And I think that's important. We judge our own performance based on how we feel about the work we do, but how we feel about the work we do is biased.
Yes.
The data is not. So if we can just sort of question ourselves a little bit and look at the data, we get a different story sometimes from that, and that's where we get great outcomes.
Sure, absolutely. I often quote Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. He says, the key to any improvement effort is an honest assessment of our current reality. He says it is a diligent effort to determine our truth. And one of the things that I often ask schools when I work with them is, what is your truth? And I ask them these questions. I say, for example, when you were to consider the difference that you make in the learning lives of kids, at the end of a year, at the end of the school, at the end of their K-12 experience, what are you really good at getting them to be really good at? And where are the areas, perhaps academically, where the kids still struggle? So first I'd like to think about have them think about their academic outcomes and what are they successful at moving kids toward being able to apply independently and on demand. The second set of questions is really about the who. Which of your students are moving on a trajectory where they're getting better and better in relation to themselves, and which of your students may be losing ground? I want you to think about the kids and the path that they are working. And the final question, and this is the big one, what practices, what choices, what decisions that you are making are influencing those answers to those questions?
Are changing the answers.
Exactly. And here's what's really stunning to me. When I go to schools all over this great state and engage with some of the most committed educators who you can possibly meet, and I ask them the question, what is your truth? Many of them cannot articulate it. They don't know. And that's because we often are so enmeshed in the day-to-day work.
Right.
We're so busy toiling. We've got our heads down. We're doing our level best to keep up with all of the demands that are coming in. That we don't often step back, look at the data and say, well, how are we doing and how do we know?
Right.
Which are the practices that we should continue? Perhaps which practices should we discontinue based on the outcomes that we see we're getting from kids?
So you teach people how to use that data to have valuable lessons out of it.
Exactly.
To really improve the whole state of education by
That's
using
so
the data.
key.
Yes.
Now you mentioned this great state. This great state happens to be New Jersey,
Yes.
but our audience could be anywhere in this great country,
Oh, wonderful.
which has 50 great states.
Yes.
The reason why I'm bringing that up is because your background in this great state uniquely positions you, I think, to really espouse this particular disruptive idea about
Yes.
using data to improve your outcome. You were the Chief Academic Officer for the
Yes.
state of New Jersey?
Yes.
Talk some more about your background and where your focus comes from.
Well, I think what's really powerful in terms of my own journey as an educator is I started as an aide. I was a paraprofessional at a school for children classified emotionally disturbed and autistic. So at the time, these are children with severe learning disabilities and emotional disabilities. So I started in that role as an aide, and it was really there that I fell in love with the classroom, where I got to experience a special relationship between a teacher and a student, and that wondrous, amazing moment when a kid gets it.
Right.
And that's when I really became passionate about becoming an educator and an influencer.
Okay.
And so when I was in that school, I worked my way from an aide to a teacher to the master teacher of the school. I then went into public education. I was in Millburn, and I was a special education teacher there. While I was in that place, I just wanted to be able to do more for my colleagues and for kids.
Okay.
I got my doctorate at Seton Hall University and became a vice principal in Hope Township.
Okay.
From there, I was a principal in the Morris School District and really learned to work with a very diverse community where children spoke Spanish. There were children of poverty, children of great wealth, and how to meet the needs of all children at the same time. And data was pivotal. That was when data really started to come onto the scene. And so we used that to challenge ourselves to make sure that we were reaching and teaching every single child and that we knew it, not based on our good intentions, but what the outcomes, what the data actually showed us. So from there, I became a superintendent for a time. And while I was successful, I was not happy. My passion lies in being close to the real work of engaging with kids and teachers. I went back to being a middle school principal, and it was from there that I was invited to apply for this opening at the State Department and be Chief Academic Officer. So for 2 years, I traveled the state from High Point to Cape May and Keyport to Camden and met over 30,000 educators and came away with a very important conclusion. And that is that we are the right ones and this is the right work, and that it is data that can shine the light on the path to ensure that we help every child become the very best that they can possibly be.
Oh, this
That's
is
great.
great. It's such a pleasure to have you on the program.
Right. We'll have to take our first break, Tracy.
Okay.
We'll be back
with
in a minute with Dr. Tracey Severns.
you. Yes.
All right?
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Tracy.
Linkit is the premier data warehousing, analytics, and assessment solution. Districts simply send us all of their data, state, local, and third-party, provide teachers and administrators with rich access to multiple measures to drive instruction and leadership decisions. You can create and administer tests in any grade, any subject, via our plain paper bubble sheets and online test taker, and drill deep into standards, perform item analyses, and create a variety of custom reports. We encourage you to reach out today to learn how you can pilot Linkit for free January through June.
Welcome back to DisruptEDtv, where in every episode we try to identify a disruptive idea that a school can use to change its outcome, to spark the kind of conversation that creates improvement in that school. My name is Al Cini, and
I'm Joe Osamendi.
Joe, it's
Always a pleasure.
nice hanging
Yes.
with you. I appreciate that. But our guest, our really special guest today is Dr. Tracey Severns, who is talking about data, and we're talking about the kind of data that every school keeps, but may not actually take advantage of.
Utilize it.
You know, before the break, as you were talking, especially about your special ed background, I know that instructors, people tend to look at other people through a kind of a personal lens. And what really helps about using data to kind of augment that lens is that we get a broader view of the people that we're serving, and a lot of corners that we might otherwise overlook all of a sudden become illuminated for
Yes.
us. Maybe you can talk a little bit about why that's so important.
Well, it's important to do a number of things. First, we really need to know what our learners bring into the classroom. We need to ask some questions in advance to say, what do you already know? What are you already able to do so that I can take you from where you are to where you need to be? So that's very important on the side where it comes to planning. and really implementing those lessons. When we look at the outcome data, we need to ask ourselves, how did my approach influence the student's ability to master those intended objectives? And so what we need to be able to realize is that we have kids who come to us all across an academic spectrum. And we have an obligation to every student to bring them farther than they were the day before. I mean, my expectation always has been as an educator is that every time the children cross the threshold, they are better off than they were before. Well, that means that I need to know where they come in so that I know to take them farther. Now, one of the things that we have found when looking at the data is sometimes there are some lost boys or girls, or there are populations where we are not helping to advance at the rate or in the way that they most need to. So for example, some data analysis techniques can reveal that we may be teaching well to the middle, that the average kids may be rising, but we may be losing our low students, and our best and brightest may not remain our best and brightest. That those high
they may not be going as far as they could.
Exactly, don't remain flying high if they are not sufficiently challenged.
Right.
So the question becomes, how do I know where all of my students are? And how do I move them to where they need to be? And then how do I determine if, in fact, I was successful at getting them there? And that ties into your idea earlier of the feedback loop. The most important feedback is what comes back toward the teacher. And lets me know, how have I done with moving students forward?
Yeah, I know you don't like to use the word dashboard, but in a way, it's almost like we're creating a dashboard that allows us to control the trajectory of the school in a mindful way.
Yes.
But I know you don't exactly like to use that word.
Well, I don't want people to perceive it as if it's on a computer, or if it's cold, or if it's separate from this work that we do. I mean, sometimes what I find is really presents itself as a challenge as people say, I didn't get into teaching to deal with data. I love the kids, and I love what I teach. And I don't view it as a this or a that. I think that there's a beautiful place called where we can maintain the that art of teaching, the love of learning, and and the passion that we feel toward students and helping them become the best versions of themselves.
Data is a good
but
tool
we can
for
use
that.
data to get them there.
It's
It
a way to
doesn't mean
demonstrate that you're actually
abandoning
making the
one.
progress
Yes,
that you feel you're making. So you're
exactly.
proving your feelings. That's so important.
It's true.
Okay, now imagine that we're part of a faculty meeting, because that's
Okay.
kind of like what I hope we're going to be. We're part of a faculty meeting. So
Yes.
there's a faculty meeting out there somewhere watching this program.
Yes.
Your first step in working with that team is to take an inventory of the data that they have that
Yes.
is actionable. That they
Yeah.
could. How would you start with that?
Well, I start by asking people, educators, schools, what data do you have? What data do you have? And then we kind of create a list and an inventory, as you mentioned, of the data that we have. Then I ask them to take stock of, well, what data do you use? And right away there becomes this apparent this gap between what we have and what we use. Then I ask, well, what data do you need? What data do you need? Now that may be a data source that you don't have. For example, the opinions, the beliefs, the perceptions of the people in the school about what's even possible for the children who we teach. So you may have an absence of important data that you really need to tap into in order to move forward. So as a school, I would ask, well, what is it we most want to achieve? And so what data would reveal where we are in relation to our goal? What I would do then is I would put it in the form of a picture, which is, when we talk about data, I'm talking about a graph. I would use color, I would use a line graph, a bar graph, any presentation that draws people in. People like pictures. Even those who say, I'm not good at math, that's why I don't do data. It's not about statistics and correlation coefficients.
No, it isn't.
It's just about taking the data, looking at bar graphs, looking at line graphs, looking at pie charts, and saying, well, what do I notice? So the key to data is creating a culture of inquiry. Where we are consistently asking and answering questions that brings us ever closer to our truth, which is, how are we doing with our kids and how do we know?
That's it.
So as a leader, as a teacher, I would present the data and say, okay, let's take a look at this data together. And as a school community, we would say first, what do you see? See, I want you to look at the data through your lens and share with us the perceptions that you bring to bear. So what do you notice?
Yeah, that's
The next question is, to what do you attribute the results? What I need to know now is your attributions. Why do you think we're getting what we're getting?
Okay.
And it's critical to understand people's attributions because your attributions determine your actions, which determine your outcomes. So when I have been places where they don't believe that their actions are attributing to their outcomes. If all the attributions are outside the window, they are about the parents or poverty or the community or factors over which they have no control, then they are not inclined to change the things over which they do have control that changes the outcomes for kids.
that is so key.
Right, so that's the second question. To what do you attribute the results? The third is what new questions come to mind? What does it cause you to wonder? Because what I have learned is it is your new questions that will propel us to seek new answers, that causes us to delve more deeply into the data, and it reveals new understandings that leads to new questions, new understandings. So it is a recursive process that makes it very alive, very dynamic. The final question is, okay, what should we do?
Right.
What are your recommendations? What I believe is the people who are closest to the kids and closest to the curriculum have the greatest insights to share. Unfortunately, leaders who are so busy telling about the data, telling what they see in the data, aren't listening.
Okay.
So it's about designing a process that deliberately elicits the voice of everyone in the room. That says, what do you see? Why do you think this is happening? What questions come to mind and what can we do?
It's terrific.
Very interesting that you say, you make data reading the phrase, a picture says 1,000 words.
Yes.
Yeah, that's,
And that's
so
really
important,
important
the
about it.
visualization thing.
Yes.
People just think
How
of
it's
data as
presented.
numbers. Exactly.
right.
We have to come to our next break, but
Okay.
we'll be right back, Tracy.
Back in a minute to talk with Tracey Severns. Thank you. We're right back. Welcome back to DisruptEDtv, where my name is Al Cini,
I'm Joe Osamendi.
but more important than either Joe or me is
Absolutely.
Our guest, Tracey Severns, who is here
Dr.
today,
Tracey
Dr. Tracey Severns, who is here today talking about, with passion about a subject that a lot of people I think are intimidated by, Joe.
Yeah, or you make data come alive. Right?
Yeah,
There's
that's the
most people
exciting-
think it's boring and just facts and figures. You make it come alive.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, in your own history, you talked a little bit during the break about some of the achievements that you've accomplished, some of the
Yes.
things you've accomplished by using data. Maybe you can outline that for us.
Well, I really attribute data to changing my personal life and my professional career. It truly made things possible that wouldn't have been otherwise. So a number of years, not long ago, I forget what year exactly, I was named New Jersey's Principal of the Year, and I attribute that largely to the fact that when I have worked in schools, we have improved our outcomes in really measurable ways, in significant ways, and not just the test scores. I'm talking about the culture of the school, what it feels like to learn there, what it feels like to work there. And so when I was in Mount Olive as principal, one of the things that I knew is that while we were a very good school, that it could be a great school. And I set about to use the data within that school community, along with my colleagues, along with the teachers, even partnering with the students to set really aspirational goals. And so we started to weave this work of using data into everything we did. We consistently asked that question, how are we doing and how do we know? And we refined and improved the work that we were doing for students. And it culminated in really a distinguished honor. We were named a National School of Change.
Yeah, congratulations.
One of only 6 in the entire United States of America. And what makes it particularly noteworthy is that we were not the typical kind of school selected for that award. Most commonly, that award goes to schools that are, if you will, failing, struggling, and they became good schools. The challenge here, the challenge for us is that we were already a good school. And what I learned over the course of my career is that what a good school often lacks and a struggling school has is a perceived need to change. So what I have learned is that data reveals a perceived need to change. It can create a perception of opportunity, of the potential to be even more than perhaps we think is possible. It's a way to celebrate your accomplishments. It's only when you know from where you've been can you really take stock of where you're going and then celebrate your achievement when you get there.
Absolutely.
So the key is data. That the data has I say to people, the data will set you free. The data will speak your truth. The data will reveal that perhaps you're doing better with kids than other people even say that you are.
Yeah, wow.
So when you are able to look at the data and really examine it from various perspectives, that it can move that school community forward. That we have used this to enhance the culture, to elevate the capacity, and to improve the community in which we are together
You use
working and
data
learning.
for actually creating a community for continual improvement.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's exactly what
it's,
we've done.
It's continuous
Absolutely,
improvement,
yeah.
and it's. I think you
Absolutely.
called it earlier a culture of
Inquiry.
inquiry,
Yeah.
where I'm questioning, self-evaluating all the time, and using that information, that data. You know, I really hate to call it data because data sounds so cold.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, really, what you're doing is it sounds to me like you're taking data in a school and converting it into wisdom, because
Yes.
wisdom is what we use to make outcomes.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And
right.
so it's that whole idea of taking all these records that you're keeping and converting those records into a plan that can help us to become better. And you made such a great point earlier too, Dr. Severns, and when you said it's not about taking a broken school and fixing it.
Right.
It's about taking a good school and making it even better.
Exactly.
And the point is that next version of your school is always better than the last version is, and that should happen every year, every month.
Yes.
It should happen as often as you're willing to ask that question.
Exactly.
Because continual improvement is ever going. It never
Sure.
ends.
So in your experience, does that culture of inquiry start with the superintendent, or does it start with an instructor, or?
I think it really can come from anywhere. It can come from everywhere. However, the leader bears a great responsibility in establishing a culture that welcomes questions, so that we ask ourselves, why do we do it in this way? So if we were to take a look at the decisions that are made every day in schools, where we set up the schedule, where we put kids in certain classes, where we have certain levels, we have really a moral and ethical obligation to ask ourselves, what happens for kids when we put them there? And so if we have, for example, classes that are homogeneous, meaning just blended ability groups, and then we reach a grade level where now we put them in strata, we put them in ability groups, what happens for them there? And if we don't continually ask ourselves, well, when we put kids in classes or courses, what does that mean for their future? Because there may be some pathways that as early as 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade puts you on a course that leads toward struggle, dropout, or failure, then we can't keep doing that.
Right.
We have to really know where certain pathways tend to lead. We have to question really all of our practices. And when we do that, it becomes very exciting. The reason I get so excited about it, people have called me a data evangelist, because it is true that I am on a mission. And my message is this, that when we begin to ask ourselves questions, John Hattie's question is, know thy impact. Right? What is the impact that you are making every day, from the leader to the teacher, to paraprofessional, students in the classroom, and parents at home? What is the impact of the decisions that you make, of the practices in which you engage? And the only responsible answer can be advanced through an honest analysis of the data.
That's
Right.
okay.
The data speaks. I always said, I think the data needs to speak more loudly than any voice in the room.
It does, and we have to learn to listen to it in order to be able to improve ourselves.
That's right.
Really key. We're coming to the part of the program where we really get to focus on your mission.
Okay.
And I mean, your passion for what you do is obviously coming through. And I know that you do a lot of speaking.
Yes.
And you do coaching and consulting, I think,
Yes.
as well. So we're at that part of our program where you get to talk into the camera and tell people how to reach you.
Okay.
And why they should call you, why they should contact you.
All right, well, I am currently serving as Director of Student Performance in the Mount Olive School District. When I returned from the State Department, I asked my superintendent if he would take me back part-time. So what that means is 4 days a week, I'm currently in my district doing the very messy, very real, very meaningful work of working and learning alongside educators in service of kids. And it gives me 4 days a month to go to people who want to do better by the kids they serve. So you could contact me through my website at teach4results.com. My name is Dr. Tracey Severns. I do have a website. I do a lot of in-district support and coaching. I do some data conferences. I'm doing a data conference in January in Mount Olive, as well as in South Brunswick. So I'm available anytime. As I said, it's teach4results.com. And my mission is to make more possible for kids all over the state and the nation. So if I can help you, I will be there for you. Call me.
Oh, Dr. Severns, you are
Thank you.
exactly the reason why we do this show.
Wow, thank you so much.
Really, I'd say that,
Pleasure meeting
and
you.
it's
Thank
such
you.
a
I
pleasure
appreciate it.
having you on, and I think it was such a great idea that you brought with you, and hopefully you'll be including it in some of your programs.
Yes.
You make data so real that I think everybody can embrace it
It's just
Great.
as a platform for continual improvement.
That's what it's all about.
absolutely terrific. Thank you all for joining us today on DisruptEDtv. Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Severns, for being our guest. My name is Alcini,
I'm still Joe Asamendi.
and we'll see you again on DisruptEDtv.
Absolutely. Thank you.